My name's Caroline, and this is a talk that combines two big loves of mine, really. Riding a bike and reading books, and these are two things that normally can't safely be combined. But I did combine them in a literary cycling tour of the north of England. And they are more similar than they might appear at first. When any of us go out on a bike ride, we sort of plan from A to B. We have our start and our finish point. But the reality of what happens when you go out on a bike is quite different, especially longer tours. It's a bit like life where things and obstacles get in the way. So if I get home from this kind of bike ride from A to B, you say, yeah, I cycled here and I got there, the end. That's kind of a boring story. Whereas if we come back from any kind of outing and all of these little events happen, then that's where the story is, which is exactly the same as how stories are constructed in films and TV and books. What we have in a literary world is we have the exposition, we have the beginning of the story, which sets up the who, the what, the why, and the where. So someone leaves the door like a hobbit on an outing, like a little Frodo, just goes out and then ends up leaving the Shire or going somewhere. They get taken off course. So instead of going this way, things start to happen, and you usually have to overcome a series of increasing obstacles until you reach some ultimate obstacle, which then you have to recover from to try and get back to where you were going. And then finally you have the outcome where you get back on track, but you get to the end same as if it was A to B simply, but something's happened to the character at the end from how they were at the beginning. You usually changed. In the middle, that's where the story is, the same as a bike ride. And that's the interesting part. So they're not that particularly different. So a bit of background about me first. So there's kind of two parts to cycling life. In my early 30s, I was quite obsessive about cycling, as most of us are at a cycle touring festival. And I was really happy. I was a happy little character. I was going off on my bike. I was going on group tours in Cuba. I was taking my bike on my own to Mexico and Argentina. And everything I did was active, jumping out of planes, running. I was in the St. John ambulance because they had a cycling division, and came back from Argentina where I'd been for a few months, and I got a job I worked in an office, but I got a part-time job as a cycling instructor in London. So I was living my little cycling dream, and I was very happy. But things take you off course. And I had a bad back, and I had a bad back since I was 17. But this injury, this recurring injury, reached a sort of pinnacle where I had a ruptured disc, a herniated disc that was stopping me cycle. It was causing pain down my leg, and I was losing power. So I was taken off track, and everything that had kind of made me, that how I defined myself, I could no longer do. This whole thing lasted about 2 years, but I had back surgery in the end, and it was semi-successful. So it got me back on the bike, but it meant I could no longer sit down for long periods of time, so I had to quit my office job. And I thought, oh God, what can I do? I can't lift anything heavy. I can't sit down for hours. I can't ride my bike reliably, consistently. So I thought there were two options. What can I do where I walk around and don't carry anything? I thought, well, I can become a traffic warden. That's a terrible idea. Or a teacher. Becoming a teacher, teach English as a foreign language, involved getting a degree. So, because you need a degree, it doesn't matter what in, but you need to tick a box there. So I decided to do a degree, modules to build up points towards a degree in literature, because I love books and I was a mature student. So all the things I studied, all the different books I read, formed a sort of pattern. So when I was coming towards the end of my degree, 2 days after my final essay, I'd planned a little literary cycling adventure, because plenty of the authors I'd been studying were either from the north of England, or their novels were located in the north of England. So I thought I'll go on a little bike adventure, and it was the first solo tour that I had done since before my back problem since back surgery. So I was feeling quite, on the one hand, I thought I'll go close to home because I was feeling quite anxious and I wasn't sure what my body was capable of anymore. Plus I was doing it on my own. So the tour was going to take me from near Blackpool over to Scarborough. The reason I was starting in Blackpool was not because of its literary merit, but because my mum and dad lived near there. And my dad had also said, if you get any problems, you can give me a call. I'll come and get you, which was reassuring. So off I went on my wee bike. And the way I used to plan journeys pre-bad back was that I would just look at distances and think, that'll be fine. And I would do big distances sometimes, not as mega as a Tour Divide, but, I could do 60 to 100 miles. I would be fine with that. So because it was me back on the road, I thought I'll keep the distances short, slowly integrate myself back into how I used to do things. What I never used to do was check the profile, and this little tour educated me to start learning how to use Strava or Google to look at the climbing, because I didn't used to do that, and I didn't do that on this tour. So my 31.5 miles that I thought would be done in a few hours took a long time because I was doing nearly 2,400 feet of climbing with panniers. So that was a bit of a shock. However, where this route took me was through an area called the Trough of Bowland. It's absolutely stunning. It's an absolutely beautiful area. It's quite barren. You don't pass many people. I didn't pass anyone on this particular day in the first half. There's also no phone signal. So it's hilly. There's no phone signal. If anything goes wrong, I'm on my own. So it was a kind of trial by fire, this outing. But yeah, so where I was heading towards for part of this day's ride was through the Trough of Bowland. I went for a stop on Dunsop Bridge. The reason I was aiming for Dunsop Bridge is because it's the geographical centre of Great Britain. So in literary terms, the geographical centre of Great Britain means that I'm in Middle Earth. So J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, is Middle Earth. There's a place called Stonyhurst College, and it's where J.R.R. Tolkien's son studied to be a priest, and Tolkien went there to visit him, and he would sit in Stonyhurst, and he wrote some of Lord of the Rings there. We're literally in Middle Earth. And also, when he would look out from Stonyhurst, there are certain little places called Shire this and Shire that. We're in the Shire. We're where the hobbits are from. So this was it's quite a wonderful place that we are. Also, it's a good place to have a coffee. Hobbits eat 6 times a day, so hobbits and cyclists, there's some comparisons going on there. It's absolutely beautiful. Just around this Trough of Bowland, Forest of Bowland area. Forest doesn't mean forest, it means hunting grounds in this context. The only thing to watch out for was sheep round hairpin bends, but there were no people, just hills. And at Dunsop Bridge there were other cyclists and motorcyclists hanging out there, so it's really a wonderful place to be. And one thing I like about going out on the bike and being back out on the bike is it is a mini adventure. It doesn't have to be the other side of the world. It could be Middle Earth. It can be the middle of Britain. And it's quite desolate there for such a populated country. There's not many people. It's amazing what you can see on your front door almost. But this is a little extract from Lord of the Rings. It's in The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and Return of the King in slightly different versions. But this is Frodo the Hobbit as he's about to go out and he's going to leave the Shire, and he doesn't know what's awaiting him. He doesn't know that he's going to have to save the entire world from evil. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road is gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with weary feet until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither then I cannot say. You go out the door, you don't know what you're going to find, but you take a leap of faith. It's quite often worth it. And I stayed the night in Sladeburn, which is a lovely youth hostel. It opens at 5, so luckily it was a sunny day. I went round the corner and lay on the grass by the river. When I came back at 5 o'clock, there was a whole load of cyclists waiting to get in, because they were in the middle of their epic journeys. They were doing Land's End to John O'Groats. There's plenty to do around here. Stage 2. Looked at the weather and was not happy to see that gale force winds and heavy rain was forecast. There was a storm for 11. So I got up really early. I thought I'd try and outride that because I wanted to head to Haworth. Haworth is Bronte country, so in my head I've got Kate Bush's Wuthering Heights, Wily Winding Roads playing for the Bronte Sisters. And again I thought, 27 miles, it can't be as bad as yesterday, it's short, I should be there for 11's, because I left really early. And subsequently checking the profile, it was 3,641 feet of climbing, which in cycling parlance is an Alpe d'Huez, but with panniers. This was horrific. This was absolutely horrific. I did meet some people out on these roads. I remember one local giving me encouragement by telling me that I should be riding my bike and not taking it for a walk as I was pushing it up one gruesome hill. And another man, he shouted out to me, "Bradley Wiggins trains round here," as I was pushing it uphill again. I thought, not with panniers, he doesn't. So it was absolutely horrendous. One thing I wanted to experience getting towards Haworth was the Bronte sisters used the landscape in their novels in Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights a lot to represent what's going on in the story and to represent inner emotional turmoil. And I was having quite a lot of emotional turmoil on this journey. By the time I got to Cologne, I found a big supermarket because it was all lovely landscape, brutal, lovely landscape. It took me 2.5 hours to do 12 miles, so I'm at walking pace. I had 2 breakfasts, I had 2 loads of porridge in there, and then I rang my mum, who thought I was going to turn back. She said I sounded utterly beaten. I thought, I'm not cycling back the way I've come. It was raining, it was windy, the hills were never ending, so when the main meal started at 11:30, I stayed and had a baked potato. And then I was thinking about Jane Eyre, and Jane Eyre's like a bit of a heroine of mine, this story, because she's constantly put against society and constantly goes out and battles against them and stands up for herself. So I thought Jane Eyre wouldn't set up home in a supermarket. She would go back out. So just as I was about to leave the supermarket, after being in there for like a good nearly 2 hours, I saw they had a bicycle t-shirt for sale, so I bought that to add to my luggage. I thought it was an auspicious sign, just carry on, keep going, have a go. The reason it was so hard going is because I was going over the Pennines. I would plan this route very differently now. Or I would, but backbones. All of it was to do with backbones. Anyway, I was on my way to Haworth, so I was cycling through the Wuthering Heights and the Jane Eyre kind of bleak, beautiful, purple heather, pheasants, landscape, craggy hillsides. And as I got to Haworth, the weather started to clear up, as it does when you get to the end. The landscape really was beautiful. Lush greens, purple heather, trees, and you don't get that without the rain, so I thought this was quite well reflected in a poem by Charlotte Bronte. So life believe is not a dream, so dark as sages say. Oft a little morning rain foretells a pleasant day. Sometimes there are clouds of gloom, but these are transient all. If the shower will make the roses bloom, oh why lament its fall? So you don't get the good without the bad, and you don't get the ups without the downs, and it's about the weather in one sense, and we do have a really beautiful country here. It's also to do with bad times. That's what I was taking from it anyway. You make your own interpretations depending how you feel on music and poetry and novels. But I was also kind of thinking, well, I'm doing this bike ride and I didn't think I would be doing it. I'm getting there slowly. So it gave me a bit of hope, that wee poem. It was nice to see that. And then the weather really cleared up and I was amazed and made up to find out the youth hostel on top of a hill was in this Victorian Gothic mansion, which is exactly the Bronte experience that I was hoping for. So I went inside, got a key, went up the stairs. There's a beautiful stained glass green window, and then I went up another flight of stairs and I'd got a private room. And I opened the door and I started laughing because it was the attic room. And the attic room in Jane Eyre is where the madwoman is, or in a nicer context, Bertha, Rochester's wife, who he's trying to keep hidden, who is unwell. I really enjoyed the fact that I was in that room. And the rain started again and tappering on the window. So I was thinking of Wuthering Heights and Kathy banging on the ghost, going, "Let me in, let me in." In my imagination, I was having a great time. The next day was a rest day. I'd planned that, but I needed it, and it was to visit where the Bronte sisters had lived with their brother and their father. They lived in the parsonage, and it's 3 sisters. We've got Anne, Emily, and Charlotte in order of age. There's someone in the middle here. Branwell, the brother, painted this and then painted himself out. He was an alcoholic. The 3 sisters were middle class, but were not married, so they were financial troubles. And in order to do a respectable job as a middle class woman, you quite often become a governess or a teacher. Quite pleased to find out that Charlotte had been a teacher, seeing as I had become a teacher. That was reassuring. But what's quite amazing about the novels that they wrote, the 3 sisters wrote in this time, is it was not deemed okay for women to write in the 1840s, in this era. Quite often, when you see a poem or a book that says anonymous, it's for 2 reasons. Either genuinely they don't know who wrote that, or the person who wrote it might have been a woman who didn't want to reveal her name, that she was female, because it was looked down upon. So anonymous can be used 2 ways. What Charlotte Bronte did, along with her sisters, is they used pseudonyms, ambiguous pseudonyms, when they first sent their books off to the publishers, so they wouldn't be prejudiced against because it was written by a woman. And Charlotte Bronte was Curabell, Emily was Ellis, and Anne was Acton. So the 3 books were published in 1847 under these pseudonyms, and then they were big successes. So because they were successful, they were able to out themselves and say, "This is my real name," which is why it's published under Charlotte Bronte. And there was negative feedback because of that. That some people thought women having these kind of ideas in their books was shocking. One of the ideas that was very important in Jane Eyre, I feel, is that Jane is an orphan looked after by a cruel aunt, and throughout her life she's put in positions where people are behaving in a superior manner to her because of their status, because of the church, because of being school teachers, because of being aristocracy, and all the time they are inferior to her. She asserts her equality with them. These people behave in a way that is not kind or moral, and she does, and she stands up for herself. So it's an amazing story. It's not just a romance novel. What I like is one of the ideas behind it is, she says in the book, "I am no bird and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. Whether you're male, female, or non, you are just you." And to assert yourself like that is quite a powerful message. And also, like I said, she just keeps battling it out against society and the elements. And Temptation with Rochester, who I'll get to, she says, "I feel free when I'm touring on my bike. I feel like a free, independent person then. People come and talk to you, and you're free to talk to them when you're out on your bike." It's quite a level activity. You know, sometimes you're out in a club ride and you're with other teachers and you're with lawyers and you're with milkmen. Cycling kind of has a nice way of that. So Jane Eyre is an interesting novel because it combines a few different genres. So it is a romance, but also it's a Bildungsroman, which means it's a coming of age story. So that's innocence to experience, and often that's done through having a child becoming an adult, same as Pip in Great Expectations. It's an adult novel. It also combines a lot of the Gothic. The Gothic was very popular the century before, but this book combines these elements. So the Gothic's good for ghosts and female victims, older male villains and moral closure. But again, the male villain in this is Rochester, but he's not really a villain. There's some redemption for him as well. So it's playing around with the form. Again, I just like certain passages from Jane Eyre where Rochester's kind of toying with her. He's got the wife locked away up in the attic that's unwell, and he doesn't tell Jane about her, and they go to get married. But when he's toying with her emotions, he's not taking it seriously. she fights back to him, even though he's a boss, even though he's rich, even though he's got status. She says, "Do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain and little, I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you. It is my spirit that addresses your spirit, as if both had passed through the grave, and we stood at God's feet equal, as we are." Quite powerful message even now for everyone. Like, you take away the money, the status, the job, it's about who you are, not what you are. So I think that's a really strong message. The other book that I was really excited to be kind of in the environment of was Wuthering Heights. Again, the environment is a very different book though. It's not a romance. People think it's a romance. It's a study of, I think it's a study of the negative aspects of love and obsession and jealousy and possession and cruelty. And it's two characters that cannot be together, that want to be together, but because of themselves and because of society, it's not possible. Heathcliff's an orphan. He becomes friends with the sister of the family he lives with, and then they fall in love. The brother's jealous. When the father dies, the brother takes over and turns Heathcliff into a serf, essentially. They never stand a chance, but their love is twisted because of what happens. The environment provides an escape for them because their emotions are kind of wild, but it's also dangerous. So it's to the point where love is a negative emotion. Even when Cathy dies, Heathcliff tries to get close to her corpse in the grave. So one thing he says to her after she's dead is, "Be with me always, take any form, drive me mad, only do not leave me in this abyss where I cannot find you." So it's got some really gothic elements in it. But I would say that kind of obsessional feeling about something was a bit, I suppose, in retrospect, how I was about cycling before my back surgery. It was everything. Everything I read, everything I did was based around it. And when I couldn't ride my bike, it did feel like an abyss. It wasn't a happy time. And I would lie in bed and look at my bikes, because my bikes were in my bedroom, and I would just feel lost, because I'd lost kind of who I was, how I defined myself, which is not necessarily a good thing. One of the reasons I think that there's so much death or sadness in the novels of the Bronte sisters is because Haworth was a more dangerous place to live than London in the 1840s. If you made it to 24, you were doing all right. Emily made it to 30 and 29 and Charlotte 38. One of the reasons being was that the water supply for Haworth was running through the graveyard and was being contaminated. People were dying of typhoid and TB. So this would, as well as the landscape, this would influence this darkness in some of their novels. To quote Rochester, "No sooner have you got settled in a pleasant resting place than a voice calls out to you to rise and move on." So I was back on the bike and I was going to Harrogate just in order to get to the next place. There was no literary merit in Harrogate. And again, this time it was 26 miles, not far, but 2,000 feet of climbing. So the first half was just horrible hills again, endless. It's not just that there's hills, it's just the up and the down, relentless. When I got to Otley, I went in a coffee shop and sat with my maps and said, "Please, someone show me a better way to go," and the locals were good and helped me route out something that wasn't as torturous as I had originally planned. So I stayed in Harrogate for a night, but that was so the next day I could cycle to Castle Howard or Old Malton, which is what I was aiming for. And I'd been worried about this stage because it was 40 miles, but it was only 1,700 feet of climbing. It was rolling, beautiful hills. It was pleasant. So that was another lesson learned, that I'd rather go further distance than up and down. So I take that into account when I'm planning nowadays. Finally, after the 40 miles, there's Castle Howard in the background over the lake. It's a beautiful house. It took about 100 years to build in the 1700s, and it's owned by the Howard family. The Howard family have connections to Henry VIII. They were a really old family. Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard were two of Henry VIII's unfortunate wives. So when I got there, I was very excited just for the history. I mean, I love the Tudors TV programme, and Philippa Gregory novels. It also has a really fancy table service courtyard cafe, so I felt a bit conspicuous in there in my sweaty cycling kit, but I mean, I had to have a coffee there. It's got lovely features. It's got this amazing fountain of Atlas bearing the weight of the world on his shoulders. And this kind of symbolised to me some of the book and what goes on in the book. Brideshead Revisited, it's from 1945. It's by Evelyn Waugh. And it begins with this character, Charles Ryder, billeted in that house. That Castle Howard is the idea, the setting for the house in the novel. And he's billeted in this house during the Second World War. And he's thinking back on all the other times he's visited this house because he went to Oxford University and met Sebastian Flyte, who was going to be the next lord of this house. He was the son. Through Sebastian, Charles goes to the house and interacts with different family members. He gets to see the decline of a way of life because it's between the two world wars. So it's sort of the decline of the aristocracy, the decline of this family. And also, it made it clear to me that, a bit like that Jane Eyre idea, that we're all equal, even if this is the amazing thing about books. I wouldn't really probably have given much thought to someone who's privileged, who goes to Oxford and who is an aristocrat. But Sebastian in the novel has the weight of the world on his shoulders because he's got all of these expectations about his education and his career and what his job should be and his sexuality, and they are all contrary to his character. And he crumbles under the weight of this because it's not taken into consideration who he is. It's just what he is. So I think literature and books are amazing for that because you get to have different viewpoints. Instead of being quite negative, it kind of opens your mind into other possibilities and other ways of life and seeing different perspectives, as well as escapism and adventure. I think books are really good for that. And studying at university, I was made to read books that I wouldn't necessarily normally ever touch. So that was sometimes not great, but generally I got something out of it. Again, the interesting thing about writing or reading is the relationship between the reader and the writer. The writer's intent, they can't control what the reader takes from it. So Evelyn Waugh said he wrote that book about becoming a Catholic. He converted in later life and his love affair with Catholicism. I didn't get any of that from it. I got this decline of a way of life and the expectation and the conformity. I find it very interesting how you can read something and you take from it what's coming from you, and also you can read something more than once in your life. I do reread books, and each time you get a kind of different message from it because you've changed. It's kind of that adventure thing. You go out the door and you're one person and you get to the end of somewhere after some effort and you're slightly changed. So again, it's an interesting book. So the next day, I was trying to get to Whitby. And again, my little adventure went a bit off track. I managed to do 7 miles and I had a horrible sensation on a big A road of a lorry overtaking me so closely that I felt my bike being pulled into it. Fortunately, the lorry drove off obliviously, but I've never been passed closely. I've been in bike accidents, I've been hit by a car, but this occasion, the awareness of that's how you get sucked under the wheels, is physics and air force. And this lorry just carried on. And I was really, really shaken at how close a call that was and that sensation. So I cycled to Pickering just to kind of stop and calm down, and was really upset. It really shook me. So while I was having a coffee in Pickering, I heard a whistling and tooting from a steam train. I like a steam train. So I went over just to kind of see what it was about, because I'm inquisitive or nosy. And it was North Yorkshire Moors Railway. And it was run by a lovely bunch of retired old men, really steam train enthusiasts. and they were telling me all about how the train's got these links to the TV show Heartbeat. So lots of people were getting on and getting off, so they go and look at the countryside to do with Heartbeat. So people were doing something similar to what I was doing, but to do with a TV show. I've never actually seen Heartbeat, but it didn't matter. My nerves were shot. I was shaken up, so I thought, I'll get on the train. I'll get the train to Whitby. It's all right. I was sitting on the train feeling a bit, looking at the hills, going, I've cheated. I've not cycled over those hills. I should be cycling over those hills. This is a bike journey. And having this kind of ridiculous admonishment of myself. And the other side's going, yeah, but you've cycled up a lot of hills to get here. It's a weird dialogue you have with yourself and how you see yourself or what you're trying to do. And the reality is, it's a holiday. And if I want to get on a train, I can get on a train. But anyway, I was sat on this train. There's all these little families going to see Heartbeat. And then all the kids started to get excited and started whispering and getting more animated. All the kids, none of the adults. So I said to one of the dads, I said, what's going on? And he went, oh, it's Harry Potter. I was Harry Potter. The next station, Gothland, or Gotland, I don't know how you say it, is what they used for Hogsmeade in the first Harry Potter film. It's where Hagrid waits for Harry when he gets off the Hogwarts Express, which is what I was on. So I was so happy that I was on this train that was part of Harry Potter, because they're lovely books. I know they're young adult books. Young adult just means that the characters are children. Doesn't mean the stories are dumbed down or that the language is modified, really. It's still an adventure story. And I thought, of all the things to happen, I'm so happy. It makes nearly getting sucked under the wheels of a lorry worthwhile it's the light, it's the bad thing and then the positive thing on the other side, the down and then the up. I really like J.K. Rowling's books. So J.K. Rowling, it's a little bit like J.R.R. Tolkien. However, J.R.R. Tolkien is just a standard way for an author to write their name when they've got an incredibly long name. J.K. Rowling's real name is Joanne Rowling. She doesn't have a K in the middle. The reason it's J.K. is because in 1997, which is 150 years after the Bronte Sisters, the publishers said, we can't publish you as Joanne Rowling. We need to use your initial. And she didn't want that. She wanted to use her name. But the publishers said, well, if we put Joanne, little boys won't want to read your book. And they made her put J. K's from one of her grandmothers, I think. So 150 years, it's unbelievable. And she was the first billionaire author. And women buy more books than men in the statistics. So why the publishers are still thinking this way, or were thinking that way in 1997, is ludicrous, and yet it's something that she was made to do. But I guess she's had the last laugh. But anyway, Dumbledore. It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. And sometimes you dream and sometimes you have positive and negative dreams, but it's to actually kind of go and, I take that as go out and try to live your dreams, Don't just have them, have a go. It might not work out, but it definitely won't work out if you don't try. That was a wonderful little extra. But the real reason I wanted to go to Whitby was because of Dracula. I studied Dracula, and that's the epitome of horror and the Gothic. It's got the foreign churches or the wrecked churches here. Here we've got Henry VIII destroyed Abbey. It's got definitely a male villain. And some of it is set in Whitby. So I was also excited to go there because I think cycling's in my blood. My granddad has always cycled a lot. He's stopped now because he's 93. But he used to go cycle touring. So in his living room, there were 2 paintings of Whitby. So before this tour, I phoned him up and I said, I'm going away and I'm going to Whitby. And I then started telling him all about the Dracula stuff. And he got really angry. My granddad is generally chirpy, makes jokes, very good-natured. It's the first time I'd heard him get grumbly. He started saying, Whitby's about a lot more than stupid vampires. And it turned out the 2 pictures on his wall are to do with Captain Cook going off on his expeditions. There's paintings of the ship in the harbour. And also, my granddad in the Second World War was billeted in Whitby while he was doing his army training. So I was kind of put right there about that. So I was like, okay, granddad, sorry very much. So anyway, there's my granddad in the 1940s. He was a member of the CTC for most of his life. Dracula is an amazing book. It's 100 years before J.K. Rowling. It's 50 years after the Bronte Sisters, 1897. Van Helsing, who keeps trying to help everyone hunt down Dracula to stop this evil being, says we learn from failure, not from success. And again, I was learning how to pay attention to maps more and profiles. I was literally learning because I had to get a degree, and I was loving it. And I was learning a bit more about me and about developing me a bit more. There was absolutely nothing wrong with how I was before, I don't think. But I was having to adapt and learn because of things that had got in the way, these obstacles. So Dracula sort of takes all of the Gothic, but we're now in Victorian era, so we've got the male villain, we've got innocent women, good versus evil, moral closure, all the ghosty stuff. And also, it's the Victorians who are quite repressed, but also do like sex. So we've now got sexy women in a novel, but it's okay, they can be sexy so long as they are beheaded afterwards. So that's the stage we've reached in literature at this point, a bit of titillation, but then also punishment. So I went to the Whitby Museum and I did all this found out all this information about Dracula and Bram Stoker doing research there. And in the novel, the Demeter ship that comes in and gets wrecked that Dracula arrives on is actually the Dimitri, which is a real shipwreck, and he uses the places around there. So it's all very fascinating, but I made sure to kind of heed my granddad's words, and I went to the Captain Cook Museum and I went to the Captain Cook statue where it's got the Resolution ship, in which he went off sailing on, discovering places that we were unaware of before. And then I also found where my granddad had been billeted, which was over on the west side of the harbour, the West Cliff. So it's on the Royal Crescent, it's in the Royal Hotel, this is the building he was billeted in, and the view from there is amazing. The view from there also made me laugh, because from where my granddad would have looked out, if you go up the 199 steps up to where the Abbey is, and there's the church and the graveyard, and then there's a bench outside the front of there, that's where Dracula bit Lucy. So that would have been the view from where my granddad was billeted. So I rang him up to let him know where I was, and I left all the Dracula information out of the conversation. But it made me chuckle. And there was a map in the museum about this poor Lucy getting bitten by Dracula for the first time. And the other fabulous thing about Whitby is that if you stay in the youth hostel on top of the hill, it is next to the Abbey. So when you're going up the 199 steps at night and the mists come in and it's dark and there's the graveyard, it's really creepy. It's great. I was getting to my last stage. My journey's coming to an end. So I was going not too far, 20 miles, not too high, 1,500 feet. My legs were really fresh by this point because I'd had a day off again. There's two ways you can get Whitby to Scarborough. There's also a path called the Cinder Path that goes along the coast, just for cyclists and walkers. But it's cinders, it's little bits. So I was on skinny tyres on a road bike with panniers on. So I decided to take the road. I got up really early to beat any traffic because apparently that road gets busy. But it was absolutely stunning. I met about 3 cars because I think I left at 7. And it winds in, you get the sea on the side, and then you get little hills, and you get little forests, and it's just absolutely beautiful. So that was a real pleasure to ride. And the reason I was going there was because of this book that I'd been made to read for university that was a revelation. 1995, it won the Booker Prize. The Ghost Road, it's about World War One. It's written by Pat Barker, and again, she's used the name Pat. I don't know if she was made to do that or if that was the publishers, but it sounds ambiguous, just in case someone should be horrified that they're reading a book written by a woman. But it's It's an amazing book. It's sort of called faction. It blends fiction with fact. So it takes the story of the World War One poets. There's a great film of it, Regeneration. Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon, World War One poets who are suffering from shell shock. They get sent to Craig Lockhart Hospital in Edinburgh to recover. And in that hospital, they're treated by this doctor called Rivers. And what would happen in the First World War is if you had shell shock and you were an officer, which meant that you had higher levels of education because you got made an officer if you had, one of the ways trauma would present was that you would develop a stammer or a stutter along with the other effects of shell shock. Whereas if you were lower class, therefore you hadn't had a higher level of education, you would quite often go mute. So the book's looking at giving voice to people that didn't have a voice, and also how the voice is affected by trauma. And what they developed at Craig Lockhart, what Rivers developed, was a talking cure to help the men deal with what they'd experienced and be able to express themselves. The other treatment men would receive would be electric shocks to the mouth to force them to speak. So he developed this kind talking cure. However, what that meant was once you were cured, you could then be sent back to war. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So it combines the story of the war poets and Wilfred Owen's this book opened me up to Wilfred Owen, who has become a sort of, he's kind of a hero of mine really with his writing. He sometimes gets called a pacifist, and he's not a pacifist. What he objected to was the war being advertised as propaganda. He wrote very honestly about the war in poetry, very vividly, about what happens in a gas attack. He said he went back to war a second time when he didn't have to, and he died there. He wanted to fight for his country, but he was against the glorification of it. So he wrote very beautifully about the poetry is in the pity. He wasn't interested in making abstract poems. You can generally see what he's even visualised, the horror that he's talking about. But anyway, so we've got these real characters and this fictional character called Billy Pryor, who's lower class, who becomes an officer. He's gone mute. He becomes an officer because all the officers have been killed. And after recovering, he goes to Scarborough to recuperate before going back to war. And the book looks at how he finds it impossible to fit back into normal society. All the people on the beach enjoying Scarborough in its heyday, holidaymakers, he can't reconcile that with the life he's been having in the trenches. And he'd rather be in the trenches because he can't make sense of what's going on. So I wanted to go and see what this kind of faded Victorian seaside town's like now. What was another amazing thing in Scarborough for me, though, was that I found this plaque on the North Shore, which is the quieter shore. And it had a list of all the blue plaques of people associated with Scarborough. So I knew that Anne Bronte was there. She died of TB, and Charlotte took her to Scarborough to try and help her recover from TB. They thought the sea air would help. But unfortunately she died there. So that's why she's not buried with her sisters in the parsonage. But the other amazing thing was there was a blue plaque for Wilfred Owen. So I was beside myself. It's like a treasure hunt that's being unfolded for me. So I found this on the North Shore again. This faded Clifton Hotel is where he stayed in 1917 after being at Craig Lockhart. And he wrote some of his poetry there before he went back to war and died in November 1918. When he died, Shrewsbury, where his parents lived, the bells were ringing to celebrate the end of the First World War, and they got the knock at the door and given the telegram he'd been killed a week earlier. And there was one final thing, so there was a bit of a downer there, although I was happy to find these places associated with him. There was also a plaque for a man called Charles Laughton, who was an English actor, and with Bertolt Brecht wrote The Life of Galileo, something else I'd studied, and he'd helped translate it for an English production of it because it's originally German. And The Life of Galileo is about Galileo in Italy with a telescope proving that the Earth is not the centre of the universe with the planets going around it, but that the planets that we are orbiting the sun, which the Italian Inquisition, the church, were not happy with, because it meant that the church was not the centre of the universe and God wasn't the centre of the universe. It upset the power balance, so they tried to silence him, silence what he'd discovered, even though it was true. So this play was amazing, and I would never have read this, I would never have known about this were it not for going to uni. But the one of the quotes from it is, "All the world says yes, we know what's written in the books, but now let's see what our eyes tell us." And I thought that was just a lovely way for my little adventure to finish, because I'd read these books and then I'd wanted to go and see them for myself. And the week that I had, even though it was difficult, was so rewarding, which takes me back to the story arc. It was 9 books of inspiration, only 155 miles. You don't have to go far or fast, definitely not fast. Most of them are uphill though, 11,500 feet of climbing. But if I look at my own little story arc, I've got a cycling and activity-based life and I'm perfectly happy. Something happens, I have surgery, I can't ride, I have to change profession, I have to return to education. At the climax, I complete my degree and I set out on a literature-inspired bike ride. And it's a struggle to get over the Pennines and my own anxieties. But by the end, I've got a slightly different life. I've got a cycling and literature-based life, and it helped me overcome my inner and outer obstacles, and I'm happy. Thank you so much for coming to listen to me. Thanks very much.